Hi, this is Kogito, and welcome to another Through the Ages video. So, if you recall, after the two 4-player games in my World Championship group, I was 2 points behind Dylan Carter, who had finished first in one game and second in another. But now, after the first two 3-player games have been played, that has flipped. I managed to win my 3-player game against Piata and Pepikos, whereas in the 3-player game I wasn't involved in, Dylan Carter actually came in third, whereas Piata won. So after those results, as well as an additional 2-player game between Piata and Pepikos that Pepikos actually managed to win, we can see that I am in a, I wouldn't say decisive first place position, but solidly first place position in the group. I am 3 points ahead of Dylan Carter with the same number of games played, and I am 1 point ahead of Piata with 2 fewer games played. So even though Piata is the Glico favorite, according to Glico rating, Piata has a fair amount of catching up to do if Piata wants to win the group. Pepikos, I think it is possible for Pepikos to still win the group, but it looks quite unlikely. These games are still important for Pepikos, of course, to avoid finishing last. However, that is not relevant for this video, because this video will instead be a key opportunity for Piata to try to finish first, because it is a 2-player game between me and him. Of course, it's also very important for me in order to stay ahead of Piata and also Dylan Carter. So Dylan Carter, at this point, has not finished any of their 2-player games, so I need to make sure to win as much as possible, just in case Dylan Carter, wins all the 2-player games or something like that. Obviously, if Dylan Carter just has to win one more 2-player game than I do, or has to finish higher in a 3-player game than me, finish first, whereas I finish last, for example, and it could flip again. So this group is still quite close. Every game matters a whole lot. So without further ado, let's take a look. In this game, I'm playing first, and we can take a look at the leaders and wonders. In a 2-player game, I think the Age 2 culture leaders have the most impact, so I like to look at those first, and we can see that most of them are actually not in this game. There's no Bach, Shakespeare, or even Darwin. Instead, all we have is Antoni Gaudi, who is certainly a fine culture leader, but I would say compared to the others, his culture boost is typically less strong, especially since he doesn't really make it that much easier to build theaters or libraries, which, like Bach and Shakespeare do. Instead, I would say the major benefit of Gaudi is the science reduction he gives you, whereas the culture is kind of more of a bonus, although it can definitely still matter a lot. Anyway, the point is, Gaudi is a good leader, but he's not quite at the level of Bach and Shakespeare or even Darwin in terms of giving you culture. So for that reason, this is a 2-player game where pushing culture early might not be as important as it often is. Moving on to other leaders in Age 3, we can see that we do have Fleming and Marlena as 2 very powerful culture leaders in Age 3, at least. So those are 2 leaders that's important to keep an eye on. There's no Hollywood or internet to support them, however. There's a space flight and 3 science leaders, on the other hand, so that might also be a route worth exploring. There's also a Red Cross wonder that's especially powerful in a 2-player game, I think, as well as Mandela. The other H2 leaders we have other than Gaudi, we have James Cook, who can kind of be a culture leader if you, get lucky and get a lot of colonies. Kind of speculative, but it can happen. There's also the James Watt Railroad combo, as well as 2 other potentially powerful leaders in Newton and Napoleon, in case you don't want to go the culture route with Gaudi. As for Age 1, we can see that there are all 3 Age 1 military leaders here without Nostradamus, so military might end up being important in late Age 1, early Age 2, at least. There's also Gutenberg, who's at his best in a 2-player game. Columbus can be very powerful. Saladin, of course, always good, but maybe especially in a 2-player game, because the extra civil actions let you deny cards more from your opponent, as well as all 4 wonders, Age 1 wonders in this game being strong. So an early iron is even more powerful than it normally is. Anyway, as for which card for me to take on the first turn, I think there's pretty much no choice in this case. The Pyramids is significantly stronger than the Hanging Gardens, and is just the best AJ wonder in general in a 2-player game. I think it's on a tier on its own in a 2-player game, frankly. So I didn't really think too long before taking Pyramids. Yeah. Piata chooses to take the Engineering Genius. Makes sense, powerful card. However, it is unfortunate for Piata that the Roman Roads, which is definitely the second most powerful wonder on this row, will be discarded before Piata's turn because it's in the zone of death as I sometimes think of it in a two-player game, because obviously in a two-player game, if you end your turn with a card in this part of the row, it will be discarded before your following turn. And so as a result of that, a very common strategy in a two-player game is to put a card that your opponent wants in this spot in particular, so they have to either take it for 2 civil actions or lose it. In this case, of course, I didn't have control. It just happened to be that way. That was certainly fortunate for me. Age 1 begins. Aristotle there seemed to be no reason not to take him. I think he's probably the best leader in the row. I mean, Homer can also be good with pyramids, but he is obviously available for 3 civil actions. So I think even aside from Aristotle being the cheapest in terms of civil action cost, he's probably just the best for me. He works quite well with pyramids. So this also just felt like a pretty easy turn to me. I drew a Wealthy Territory and a Vast Territory, 2 cards that I probably don't want to seed because Piata will take the Colossus that will give them an extra colonization bonus. Piata also values Alexander the Great over Moses, notably. I think these cards are they're usually thought of as the 2 worst AJ leaders, which I tend to agree with, although Caesar, well, is a very swingy leader. That's a discussion for another day. But I think valuing Alexander over Moses is very plausible. Maybe especially in a game like this where you have, well, I guess, you know, Saladin is the main leader you'd want to replace Alexander with. Regardless, as a result of Piata's play, the iron was actually available for 2 civil actions for me. And as discussed previously, all 4 Age 1 wonders in this game are pretty powerful. Of course, 2 are on the row already that I won't be able to take. However, that still leaves 2, one of which I should be able to obtain. And just in general, an early iron like this is very strong, and there's not really another card in the row I want more. I could take the Swordsman, and I'm not in corruption, so I could even take the Swordsman plus the iron, but that kind of felt like a little too much civil action inefficiency, even with the pyramids. And the Swordsman, there's 2 copies of Swordsman, so I don't see the need to necessarily take this one. It's speculative, I don't have an infantry tactic in my hand. So after taking the iron, I ended up just building my second lab and increasing my population. That does put me in consumption earlier, which isn't ideal, certainly. But again, I didn't want to spend another 2 civil actions on the Swordsman. I didn't want any of these AJ yellow cards, so it just kind of seemed the best thing I could do with my last civil action. I drew a bonus card on a scientific breakthrough. Piata uses Alexander immediately, which allows Piata to build a second lab and get a free population for development without going into consumption, so that's definitely, obviously, a very nice benefit of taking Alexander, as it lets you do something like this. And with the final civil action, Piata takes the Swordsman after all. At least that means that there's no risk of Piata taking the second copy of Swordsman and leaving me without it. On my turn, I see the scientific breakthrough. There wasn't a particular reason to do that, other than I generally, seeding is good, gets you, you get more information about the event deck, you get developments revealed on your turn, so you can use it before your opponent. I think those are just, seeding generally being good if it's a neutral event like the scientific breakthrough seemed it would be. But an interesting development got revealed, the development of warfare. The reason it's interesting, of course, is because if I take the development of warfare, I will be an uprising, which is a little unfortunate. Obviously, if this was development of religion, I could just easily put this into religion with the happy face, but with warfare, that becomes tricky. And obviously, I don't have to take the development of warfare as kind of spoilers. However, there is actually a way on the row for me to take development of warfare, and that's this copy of Theocracy that happened to be there. Now, Theocracy is kind of an interesting card in a 2-player game, I feel, because it sort of has qualities that are particularly beneficial and particularly bad in a 2-player game. Civil actions are generally thought, and I agree, to be especially good in a 2-player game, especially early on like this, because of how important denial is. The more civil actions you have, the easier it is to deny important cards from your opponent, or just in general to manipulate the card row and, for example, get the right card onto the square of death for your opponent. So Theocracy not giving you any bonus civil actions is particularly bad in a 2-player game. However, some other qualities I think are particularly good. Obviously, the bonus culture you get from it is particularly good in a 2-player game. But I think also the military benefits are kind of, I mean, it's kind of interesting, right? Because in some ways you might say, well, that's better in like a 4-player game because with the military benefits you can really push strength to punish your opponents, which is best in a 4-player game. However, I also feel it can be quite good in a 2-player game as sort of something to hide behind. At least in my case, one thing I've sometimes encountered in a 2-player game is if I take too greedy a culture line and don't pay enough attention to my military, like even though, usually a greedy culture line often works out in a 2-player game, it doesn't always. If you don't do it right, if you're not careful enough, opponents can absolutely win a 2-player game through military. And so the extra military benefits that Theocracy has might also actually be really good in a 2-player game, not in a lets you be aggressive way necessarily, although that can be the case as well, but also just in terms of protecting yourself to help make it so your opponent can't get a military threat against you, which then puts the extra culture benefit of the Theocracy into more use. The Happy Face can also be particularly beneficial in a 2-player game because you want to be putting your population into libraries and theaters more so than you typically do in a 3 or 4-player game. And so the Happy Face helps quite a lot with making it so that you need to put less population into village temples or arenas. Anyway, all that is to say, I'm still not entirely sure how good Theocracy is in a 2-player game. However, it's definitely at its best when you have pyramids. I mean, that's true always. And in this particular situation, the Theocracy allows me to take the development of warfare. And with that consideration, I felt that it was the right card to play. And obviously, it gives me an extra draw. It gives me, the culture and other benefits. But the main reason is that I played it so that I could take development of warfare. This leaves me with 2 civil actions left, especially with me having taken Theocracy. I wanted to be careful about my civil action efficiency. So I could, for example, take Barbarossa. Probably not Brennan Circuses, but taking Barbarossa I think could certainly be justifiable. I didn't want to do that. Again, because I was worried about my civil actions. So instead I did a more efficient play of building 1 stage of the pyramids. And I also took this copy of Culture Heritage. I mean, after doing this, I had 1 free civil action. The warfare seemed redundant with the Theocracy. But the Culture Heritage also has an immediate benefit, where thanks to Aristotle, next turn what I could do is take a technology, play Culture Heritage, play Iron, and upgrade an Iron, which... if I decided that finishing the pyramids this turn wasn't beneficial or, wasn't something I wanted to do because maybe the civil action won't be that helpful for me next turn, giving me the option to upgrade Iron instead seems strong. I drew a Good Harvest, another bonus card, and a New Deposits. New Deposits definitely a nice draw with me having the early Iron. Piata's Seeds reveals the development of civil life. Piata develops Swordsman with it. Piata then builds a stage of the Colossus, takes the Barbarossa that I didn't, which makes sense. He is certainly a very strong leader, as well as the warfare to support Barbarossa. It's my turn. I seeded the New Deposits. Again, I have Iron. Piata didn't, so it seems like a natural seed. And I reveal development of planning. So... with the development of civil life, I chose to increase my population. The main reason being, I think, just so that I would have a free population in case this last development is development of religion, of which there's a higher chance now because development of planning was revealed, which was markets, agriculture, politics. After using civil life to increase my population, I decided to just go ahead and use markets to get 2 rocks, because I had saved the field for development of civil life. I decided to take a Knights, again, because I decided to do that plan I mentioned previously, where I'm going to upgrade Iron this turn. Part of the reason being that I see the New Deposits, so there is a chance, albeit a relatively small one, that New Deposits will be revealed before my next turn. But I think the other reason was just, well, I could finish the pyramids this turn, and that would be fine. That would then give me an extra 3 civil actions, after which I could again take the Knights, but with the remaining 2 civil actions, I didn't really see a great way to use them. Printing Press, like I said previously, not as usual. Sometimes a very strong card in a two-player game, but in this deck, where there's no Shakespeare or Darwin, it felt much less important. These other texts for one civil action didn't seem that strong, especially with me having Theocracy. Bread and Circuses seemed unnecessary. Genghis, with me not having any tactics, didn't seem good. I could take one of these cards for two civil actions, like the Alchemy, for example, but I mean, there's two copies of Alchemy. There's no reason to take the Irrigation now. It's only the first copy of Irrigation. I could have taken Columbus, alternately. That's definitely something that could be considered if I went with the Pyramids play, because obviously I have the vast territory for Columbus. But there are still powerful leaders left in the deck, Saladin, Ziska, Gutenberg, so I don't necessarily need Columbus either. I guess in retrospect, finishing Pyramids, taking Knights in Columbus might have been the right play after all, just because of how powerful Columbus is with vast territory. I'm not sure how strongly I considered that option while playing the game, frankly. But that's not what I ended up going with. I ended up instead upgrading an iron, which I think, again, is also justifiable, because I see the new deposits. I'll have 6 rocks next turn, with which I can potentially finish upgrading my iron mines. That's another reason to do this. It means that before my next turn, on my next turn, I'll be able to fully upgrade my iron mines, which will give me the potential to get full value out of the new deposits, while Piata still will only get 3 rocks out of it. So that's definitely a very compelling reason to upgrade these mines here. But of course, by taking this copy of Knights, that means Columbus will be discarded before Piata's turn, so I will not be able to use him with the Vast. So that's certainly a major downside of this line. But maybe Saladin, Ziska, Gutenberg are also powerful enough leaders that even if Columbus might be the best one because of how powerful he is with Vast, maybe it's okay that I passed him up. But yeah, with me not being able to get Columbus, I just discarded both my territories. Even though I have 2 bonus cards, especially with Piata having Barbarossa along with Colossus, I didn't want to cede any colonies against them. And then I drew a heavy cavalry, a rats, and a plunder. Fortunately, I drew a heavy cavalry right after I didn't take Genghis. That's how it goes sometimes. But Piata States reveals Development of Religion, definitely the best one for me. Not only does it reward me for getting a free population last turn, but Piata does not have a free population, so they can't take Development of Religion. Instead, Piata finishes Colossus, uses Barbarossa's ability, then increases the population normally to get out of Uprising before taking the Irrigation and the Alchemy. It's my turn. I decide not to cede. I'm weakest. I didn't want to reveal new deposits yet. I did, however, decide to finish the Pyramids this turn, finally, because I wanted to take one of these Age 1 wonders, especially with new deposits being in the deck. Having a rock sink is pretty important. The question is which one to take. I think they're both strong. Obviously, the Universitas, is just a very strong economic wonder in general. Especially powerful in a situation like the one I'm in, where I have iron mines, but not alchemies. The Himeji Castle is also a good wonder, in a much different way from Universalis, obviously. It gives you a bit more culture, but it also gives you a lot more protection against an opponent. And between these 2 wonders, well, first I took the Irrigation as the second Irrigation. Very important card to take in 2-player game because there's only 1 copy of Selective Breeding. But I decided to go with the Himeji Castle. And there are 2 major reasons for this. First is just the fact that the Universitas is on a discard slot and the Himeji Castle isn't. So I figured, I'm not sure if Piata would have taken the Himeji Castle, even if I had left it. It would have been a little awkward to take, maybe, because it might have been difficult for Piata to get out of corruption while taking the wonder. But I didn't necessarily want to leave Piata the option. But I think the more important reason I took the Himeji Castle was because with Piata having Barbarossa and Irrigation, I was getting a little, and Colossus obviously, I was getting a little worried about Piata's strength potential. Especially with the only tactic I have being this heavy cavalry tactic, which I am going to discard this turn because I didn't see any realistic route I would be able to get it going anytime soon. And so with me not even sure if I'll have a tactic to rely on for the foreseeable future, I was a little scared of Piata being able to get some aggressions against me or something like that. So I thought that the Himeji Castle might be very useful as a way to protect myself and to let me focus on other things other than maybe inefficiently trying to build my strength. As for what to discard, I'm going to discard this tactic and the plunder. The question is which of these two events to keep. And I ended up deciding to keep the Good Harvest and not the Rats. Honestly, I was a little surprised when I saw this when looking back over the game. Maybe my logic was that, you know, I'll want more population for things. Maybe... but in retrospect, with Piata having Barbarossa, food seems better for Piata than for me, so Rat seems like a much better event for me than Good Harvest would be. So yeah, I'm kind of surprised that I kept this. Anyway, I drew a Raid, a Strategic Territory, and a Plunder. Piata Siege reveals the Barbarians. Unfortunately, it hits me, but there was nothing I could probably realistically do about that. Piata upgrades a farm, takes Iron as well as the Engineering Genius. That's one card that I, yeah. One downside of taking Himeji Castle over Universitas is the left Engineering Genius on one civil action. I think I did consider that, but figured that it was okay because Piata won't be getting an H1 wonder, so it's a little speculative of a yellow card, even though Piata, you know, will probably have a chance to use it. But again, I just thought that the other benefits of Himeji Castle were worth giving Piata this option, even though Piata did end up taking that option. It's my turn. Again, I don't see that I'm weakest, and I didn't want to reveal new deposits yet before I can finish upgrading my mines. So I went ahead and did that, which leaves me with 3 civil actions. We have Jan Ziska available as a replacement leader for 1 civil action. However, I have 0 tactics in my hand, so Jan Ziska would basically just give me a 4th military action, which did not seem good at all. So I decided that I might as well just go ahead and wait for Saladin. No reason to take him now, because he'll be available for 1 civil action on my next turn. So instead, I have 3 civil actions to take cards. And the cards I ended up taking were first the Code of Laws. Very powerful card in 2-player game in general. I think especially when I have Theocracy seemed particularly important, so I went ahead. I also happened to have just enough science due to Aristotle to be able to play it. And then with my last civil action, I could have taken the Urban Growth, definitely, to use on potential alchemies or maybe scientific methods in H2. But I decided to take the Swordsman, I think mostly just as a little bit of extra insurance. Again, I was kind of concerned that Piata might be able to get a lot of strength going relatively quickly. So I think I just wanted a little more insurance with me not having drawn any tactics yet. The Swordsman could be good if I happened to draw a Fighting Band or a Legion, for example. It was a little speculative. In retrospect, maybe I could hope that with Himeji Castle and the fact that Piata clearly probably hasn't drawn a tactic yet, because if they had, they probably would have played it by now. Maybe I could have figured that the Himeji Castle would be enough to defend, possibly, and that the Urban Growth, you know, would be better than the more speculative Swordsman, but that also, in retrospect, seems pretty risky to me. Piata might draw a tactic this turn. Well, not this turn, because I'm ending the age, but Piata might have drawn a tactic last turn, so I do think the Swordsman is probably an important card for safety purposes. We end up discarding the colony that I drew, and I draw Pestilence, another colony, inhabited territory, and a Raiders. Age 2 begins. I lose Aristotle. Piata seeds an Age 2 event that was drawn off of Colossus and reveals my scientific breakthrough. Sadly, not the new deposits. But thankfully, Piata chooses to work on alchemies before irons. Well, 1 alchemy and 1 farm to be specific, and then takes a copy of Breakthrough that I don't. Unfortunately, Piata has to discard most of the Colossus draws due to having 2 military actions. It's my turn. I actually seed the colony. Again, I think I really wanted to reveal the new deposits on my turn before Piata has a chance to upgrade mines. So I wanted to see it for that reason. I think, again, this is a case where, you know, Rats might have been a very powerful card but I discarded it. Pestilence seemed a little risky with my population kind of being at a premium. Raiders, obviously, kind of a no-go. So I think I seeded the colony, even though it seemed very unlikely that I would be able to win it. But I think I seeded it because it seemed like the least bad option. So, punished, I think, for discarding rats. Anyway, I revealed not new deposits, but a developed territory that I wasn't able to put much into, I think, because of risk of aggressions from Piata. Well, actually, no. Sorry, I bid the maximum because I only had 1 unit. So Piata, unsurprisingly, was able to win. But I decided to go ahead, take Saladin. No real reason not to. Which leaves me with 4 civil actions left. And it's easy to get out of corruption. Well, I could have increased my population to get out of corruption, but obviously I know that there's no rats in the deck. So there's no reason not to just upgrade my 2 farms this turn. To get them going as soon as possible, or, as soon as possible given what I had done in previous turns. Which then leaves me with 1 civil action left. I could maybe take, I guess, the Alchemy to work some upgrades next turn, but next turn I was planning on finishing Himeji Castle, so the Alchemy I would only be able to upgrade 2 turns from now. That's already fairly into Age 2, and also there's a scientific method on the row. While Piata could potentially cut that scientific method, it would be pretty difficult for them to, and with there being 2 copies of scientific method in a 2-player game, I think it just isn't worth it to cut a copy, even an early copy like this one. So I figured that I was likely to just upgrade scientific methods in 2 turns instead of alchemy. So I didn't want to take the alchemy, I didn't want to take any of these other Age 1 cards, so I just increased my population. I ended up keeping the Pestilence as the event that seemed the most likely to be neutral, and at least, or, maybe I could even plan for it. And I drew 2 aggressions and a bonus card. Piata's Seeds. Luckily for me, the new deposits is revealed right before Piata is able to upgrade Iron Mines. So that's good luck for me. Piata actually, doesn't upgrade the mines yet. Instead, Piata gets out of corruption by building some swordsmen, takes a rich land, and then takes the first government that was on the road, the Republic. Which, with Piata not getting theocracy or monarchy, it's definitely important to ensure you have one of these governments in your deck. And I have a lot of civil actions now, so I could definitely have denied both Age 2 governments from Piata if Piata had let me. I forgot to give an overview at the beginning of Age 2. Let's go ahead and give one now. We can see that I'm slightly ahead in culture thanks to my theocracy and the fact that I was able to get development of religion. Piata is slightly ahead in science, however, due to getting 1 alchemy upgrade, but I am significantly ahead on rock protection at the moment. Food protection is the same, but I am significantly better in terms of civil actions than Piata. So I would say that especially because of that huge civil action advantage, I felt that overall Age 1 went better for me than I did for Piata. I think I had the better start with Aristotle plus pyramids, and it just kind of went from there. I also think the theocracy ended up helping me quite a bit. So I was pretty happy with the way I played Age 1, but let's see, how things can go in Age 2. I decided to go and seed the Pestilence. I don't think there was any particular card. I guess there is the inhabited territory that I would have preferred to reveal on my turn. But again, I also figured that the Pestilence, I should be able to prepare for it. Anyway, I did, however, end up revealing an Uncertain Borders, unfortunately. After finishing the Himeji Castle, which I think is a pretty obvious thing to do here, the question is what else to do with my turn. And I decided to take the strategy. Now, looking back on it, I'm not so sure about this. Piata does already have the warfare after all. So if Piata were to take the strategy, it would be a pure denial against me. And it would be a pretty costly denial for Piata too. Piata does not have any hand space at the moment. So of course Piata could do something like play Iron, upgrade Iron, take strategy. That definitely would be a reasonable turn. But it would still be a fairly significant cost. Piata would be taking just to cut a strategy that they, would be okay for them. Going from warfare to strategy is not the worst thing in the world, but it's definitely not ideal. So potentially I think I didn't have to take the strategy and I could have taken other cards instead. That being said, maybe there aren't that more other cards. We'll see. I do take the Scientific Method, as mentioned previously, as well as the Frugality as just the most powerful card left remaining on the one civil action part of the row. Maybe instead of the Strategy, I could have taken the Cannon. That's definitely one possibility. The other cards, I think, not so much. Maybe, Organized Religion. There's 3 H2 Happy Face buildings in H2, so there's no reason to take the first Organized Religion copy for 2 civil actions. So I think the main alternative to taking a Strategy might have been to take, for example, the Cannon, and then maybe the Urban Growth for the Scientific Methods next turn. Actually, yeah. So I guess the major alternative to Strategy would have been to take Cannon and Urban Growth instead, and I think that definitely would have been at least very justifiable, and maybe better than taking the Strategy. On the other hand, the Strategy is a pretty good card for me, because 3 military actions, is not what you want to spend the rest of the game on, and so being able to play the Strategy, especially if Piata... Now, it should be noted that Piata, in fact, looks like never ended up drawing any infantry tactics from Age 1. Because Piata's already discarded all the H1 military cards. So, without any tactics, Piata's strength potential is going to be pretty limited for the next couple turns. With that being the case, maybe there's less of a need to take the Strategy as a form of protection, because without any tactics from Piata, and with me having Himeji Castle, maybe I will be pretty safe without the Strategy, and so the cannons for potential tactics, and the Urban Growth just as a generic value card might have been better than taking this for 3 civil actions. I discard my aggressions, and I draw another bonus card, as well as a War and a Civil Unrest. But yeah, that actually tries an aggression against me. Obviously, I could have sacked my unit to Himeji Castle, but with me having so many bonus cards in hand, I thought that I wasn't going to be able to keep all of them after my next turn anyway, so I figured might as well just use them against this aggression. I also discarded the War with it. Piata decided that it was too important to get this Republic going as quick as possible, so that it was worth this revolution, which I think is probably true. There are some notable cards in the row for Piata, but I think nothing critical, so I think this revolution is probably right. Piata, in fact, and then Piata is able to get out of corruption due to Barbarossa's ability, too. We see the synergy Barbarossa has with revolutions in this case. So my turn, I see the Civil Unrest. Again, I think mainly I kind of wanted to reveal the inhabited territory on my turn. Instead, I ended up revealing a different territory, the historic territory, and I believe 3 is exactly the amount I was willing to bid on it, so I actually ended up winning this territory. And the reason 3 was the exact amount I was willing to bid is because, as we will see, I can rebuild my warrior to get up to 4 strength. Now, with the Himeji Castle sacrifice, that would put me to 8 strength in the case of an aggression. But if I had spent this bonus card too, then I would have only had 2 cards in my hand after my turn, because I only have 2 military actions left. And so that would have been just barely not able to defend an aggression from Piata, even with the Himeji Castle sack. So that's why I was only willing to bid 3, because I need 1 bonus card to defend against an aggression. Luckily, I was still able to win it. I think upgrading the labs is clearly right here. Science production is kind of my major weak point right now, so fixing it in one go like this felt strong. This leaves me with 4 civil actions left, and there are definitely, not much else I can do in my economy, so it's mostly about taking cards. And there are definitely a number of interesting options here. There's 2 wonders, both of which can be quite strong. However, at this current point in time, I am out of rocks, and I don't have engineering genius or reserves or anything like that, and new deposits is already out. And so it wasn't clear to me when I would have the leeway to be able to finish one of these wonders. I thought that maybe instead of taking one of these wonders, I would probably prefer to invest into urban buildings instead. So I think that's the reason I decided to not take those wonders. But another reason is because there's cards in the 2 civil action area that I wanted. The most important of which being this wave of nationalism. Even with Piata not having any tactics, I was still still feeling pressured by them. And the Wave of Nationalism is just one of the most powerful yellow cards in the game. Gives you a lot of rocks that you can use to defend, and so it just seemed too good to pass up, which meant that I wasn't able to take one of these wonders, which, as I said anyway, as I said previously, I'm not sure if I would have the rocks for them anyway. So with my remaining 2 civil actions, I took this copy of Team Sports. Even with the historic territory, I will need a happy face solution at some point. And the Team Sports, even though there's no peer in the game, there is Gotti, so I think the reason I took the Team Sports over Organized Religion was mainly with an eye towards Gotti. I mean, it also, denies it to Piata, which could certainly matter, but it was mainly because of how good this is with Gotti. I drew a Hussars tactic, definitely a viable tactic, and a terrorism, which I will not cede. Piata, however, does cede and reveals my inhabited territory. This one I am not able to win. 3 is the max I can bid. So Piata is able to win, sadly, with only 1 swordsman. Piata looks like Piata probably doesn't have any bonus cards in hand. But what Piata does have in hand now is the navigation, which after playing it gives Piata 4 colonization bonus, meaning it's looking pretty unlikely that I will be able to win any colonies anytime soon, and Piata has almost certainly ceded some colonies because they went for this line. They also decided to take the Harvard College. Science is also somewhat of a pain point for them. The railroad could certainly be strong if Piata was aiming for coal here. However, it's hard to necessarily aim for coal with me potentially being able to cut it. So, and science is also kind of a pain point for Piata right now, so I do understand taking the Harvard College over the railroad. And then after using Barbarossa's ability twice, Piata then takes a cavalryman as well as an engineering genius to be able to finish this Harvard College quite cheaply. It's my turn. I don't see it, obviously. I do need to address my military situation, though I can't defend at the moment. And the clearest way to do that, I think, is to play the Wave of Nationalism to basically just build 2 knights for free. After doing this, I don't even need to play the Hussars tactic, because after sacrificing a unit to Meiji Castle, I'll be able to defend an aggression. I can obviously, playing the tactic would mean that Piata couldn't force me to do a sacrifice. However, I also didn't necessarily mind doing a Meiji Castle sacrifice because I have this Hussars tactic, so this 1 warrior, who I will almost certainly not be able to send off on a colony, wasn't really accomplishing much for me, so sacking it to Meiji Castle might actually be totally fine. And so I decided to not play the Hussars yet, just to draw another card that's hopefully a suitable event for me. Anyway, that leaves me with 3 civil actions left, leaving me unable to take the Statue of Liberty. I could potentially cut this copy of coal. I think that is something I considered. Can be useful to do. However, in this game, I felt that the coal would be so late for Piata anyway, that I felt it was fine to let Piata have the coal, especially since there are other cards that can also be useful, both for me, that will not only be useful denials, but also useful for me positively, namely this breakthrough and this rifleman. Now, the rifleman is more speculative, obviously, because I have this Hussars tactic, but I thought it seemed possible that I would want it, especially for H3 tactics, but I think the major thing I wanted was just to take this copy of breakthrough, with the rifleman more being just a bonus. I didn't want these efficient upgrades because it wasn't clear right now if I'd ever want to upgrade the building, if I'm ever going to upgrade the building again for the rest of the game. In retrospect, though, I think I maybe underestimated the fact that Piata will not only have access to coal, but also to James Watt, which will make it a lot more viable to get these coal upgrades going even late into Age 2. And that, again, the Rifleman is much more of a speculative card for me, and I might not even play it ever. So it's kind of more breakthrough versus coal, and maybe the coal denial. Again, I think if James Watt wasn't on the row right now, then it definitely would be wrong to deny the coal, because it's so late in H2. But with James Watt being on the row, maybe it is right to deny the coal. I'm not sure. I draw a defensive army. Piata uses Barbarossa's ability again for the last time, because Piata does in fact go for Watt plus coal. Is able to upgrade 1 coal mine, as well as playing out the Engineering Genius 1 before the age ends, and takes an efficient upgrade to be able to upgrade the remaining 2 coal mines next turn. So James Watt obviously can be extremely helpful in getting that economy going quickly. That's, I guess that's pretty, it's pretty obvious. I play that as technique now. I mean, I have to do it to defend, and there's no reason not to. I want to use the military action before H3 anyway. In order to get out of corruption, though, the way I decided to do that is to take Gotti. Now, I obviously didn't have to take Gotti this turn because Piata already took James Watt. So I could wait for Gotti next turn when, even though Saladin will die, that will still be 1 civil action cheaper than taking him for 3 here. But the reason I took him for 3 here is because I have plans for him this turn. Namely, I will be able to use him to get this bonus from the journalism immediately. There were definitely some other options here. I could have taken these yellow cards, for instance, all of which are definitely at least decent, if not good. I didn't need the organized religion, but, you know, maybe I could have taken Cavalryman. Maybe I could have taken Napoleon, although I think Gotti is just clearly better. Mainly because of the culture bonus. With me having Himeji and with Piata not really being able to get that much strength going, again, because of lack of tactics, and with all of Piata's units being in infantry right now, making it is going to make it difficult for Piata to get H2 tactics going. I figured the military threat from Piata wasn't looking too dangerous right now, so I might as well just take Gotti to push culture more. I draw a National Pride, good card, and a Mobile Artillery. Unfortunately, I think Piata will be able to get the copy of cannons. Piata Seeds reveals a wealthy territory. With Piata having 4 colonization bonus, I had no hope whatsoever of winning this territory, so I just passed to deny Piata information about my hand. Piata finishes the Harvard College and finishes upgrading their mines. Doesn't take the cannons, actually I was wrong, instead takes the patriotism and a copy of opera. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, sorry, during my last turn, I think I did deliberately make sure that, maybe one reason I played the turn that way instead of taking, the coal, is because by playing the turn the way I did, I leave both copies of operas on this part of the rail. And what that means is, of course, if Piata doesn't take this copy of opera for 2 civil actions, then I will take the second copy, and Piata won't be able to have operas at all. And as we'll talk about in a bit, with me already building a pretty substantial culture advantage over Piata, I thought that Piata would definitely really want this copy of opera. So by playing the turn that way, I ensure that Piata would have to spend 2 civil actions taking opera. Anyway, now that it's the beginning of H3, we can take a look at the overall situation. So at this point, I've been able to build up a pretty substantial culture lead over Piata. This was due to several factors. We can see a lot of them. I'm getting 2 culture protection from Himeji Castle, 1 from my government, 1 from my temple, all things that Piata didn't have. And then obviously last turn I got Gotti going. So at this point I am more than 30 culture ahead of Piata, and 8 culture production ahead of Piata. So I'm definitely building a pretty significant culture lead over Piata, and Piata is going to have to play catch up in H3. I also, in exchange for that culture lead, I haven't really lost that much in economy either. I actually have more science production than Piata does, thanks to my urban buildings. I do have less rock production, however, Piata's rock production was upgraded late, so overall that's kind of balanced, if not still in my favor a little bit. And our food production is also the same, although thanks to the yellow token colonies, Piata's yellow bank is in a healthier state than mine. Obviously, Piata is slightly more military than me, but a lot of that's just Piata has put so much population into military. So overall, and our civil and military action situation is basically the same. Piata has 1 more civil action than I do. So overall, I was definitely quite pleased with this situation. I felt that I had a substantial culture lead without really losing too much in either economy or military. Obviously, I still needed to be careful in order to protect this lead. I couldn't let Piata have any opportunities to get aggressions against me going. However, the fact that Piata has Republic and not Constitutional Monarchy is important there. Even with warfare, Piata only has 3 military actions, and in H3 it's pretty hard to get significant military pressure going with only 3 military actions. So especially if I can cut the copy of military theory from Piata, or if it's late, I wasn't feeling too really threatened that much by Piata militarily. And if you're the culture leader in a 2-player game and have more culture production and you're not particularly scared of your opponent's military, that's definitely a good spot to be in. Now I see the National Pride, obviously it's a good event for me, but I also know what card this is because I seeded it. This is the Pestilence. And this is actually a pretty good time for me to reveal the Pestilence. Because as you'll notice, I will need to disband this warrior and was to get out of Uprising. But with the Pestilence, I can just lose the warrior instead and then increase my population normally. Now, that's still probably worse than disbanding the warrior because it costs me a civil action instead of a military action, although it is a civil action that I will have to pay eventually anyway. So I think that's, you know, still fine overall. But also, it's just, I think, the best timing for me to reveal that Pestilence that I suited way back when. It's not really going to inconvenience Piata that much, though, sadly. But yeah, as for what to do with this population, I think that's also pretty straightforward. I could put it into team sports, but I decided the opera was better here. Again, I don't really need... I'm not going to have this unit from this part of the yellow bank come out for a little while anyway, so the extra happy faces from team sports wouldn't be too helpful in the immediate term. So I just went for the opera that gives me the culture production, putting me at 13 culture production, which is definitely good. And I decided to take this copy of cannons. I could have taken this Age 3 reserves. That's definitely would also be defensible. But I decided with me having the mobile artillery tactic, this was stronger enough than the Hussars that I felt it was justified to take the cannon, just in case Piata, you know, gets military theory or gets some military pressure going. I wanted to be able to have a good tactic I could use to defend myself. Without a civil action, I just take the cavalryman as a final Age 2 military tech that will give me access now to all the Age 3 tactics. And I draw actually 2 wars, as well as an impact of harmony, which is not a good impact for me at all with only 2 military units. Piata Seeds revealing my civil unrest. This is definitely a brutal event for Piata, costing 8 culture, which is a lot, especially in a 2-player game. Anyway, Piata is finally able to get some serious culture production going, preventing 2 operas, still however pretty substantially behind me. And then takes an open growth and a multimedia. The open growth will let them build a multimedia next turn to start gaining culture with me. It looks like Piata has more or less decided that they won't be able to really pressure me militarily, and so seems to have largely committed to trying to catch up with me in culture. On my end, I decided to take the mechanized agriculture. At this point, pure food protection alone doesn't look like it'll get me much more population throughout the game, maybe 1. So I thought with it still being, you know, relatively early, I mean, not that early in Age 3 anymore, but still before the halfway point, I thought it was perfectly justified to get these mechanized agriculture upgrades going. There also wasn't really anything else I could really do with my turn anyway. So, with my last civil action, I could have taken the revolutionary idea, but I thought my science production was really strong, and rather, so even though I think normally revolutionary idea is a better card than reserves, in Age 3, in my particular situation with me having more science income than rock income, and just being in a much better position in science in general versus rocks, I thought that the reserves was better for me. It didn't, you know, it did put the tanks on 1 civil action for Piata, but Piata has the cavalryman anyway, so I thought that was fine. Just go my wars, and the terrorism card I'm definitely not seeding, and I draw an impact of variety and an impact of culture. Those are definitely good impacts, as well as a 3rd war. It's always the games that you don't want to war your opponent that you draw all the wars. Regardless, Piata reveals a strategic territory. I am able to bid more for this, but not enough to overtake Piata, unsurprisingly. Piata then takes the Red Cross for a lot of civil actions, but I think it is justified. The Red Cross is a particularly strong winner in a 2-player game, obviously, because you only have 1 opponent who can build stages on it. And Piata definitely needs to catch up with me in culture somehow, so this does seem like a pretty good way to do that. Piata then disbands a word to build a 3rd opera to catch up with me in culture even more, as well as actually does take that copy of tanks that I didn't, maybe just to have a tech that they can play for future purposes. maybe again they figured that military, I mean, we can see Piata has more or less committed completely to the peaceful path, so the patriotism is probably just a bad card for them at this point. It's my turn. I see the impact of, which one is that? I think is it Wonders? Basically it's a slightly good impact for me. Anyway, I reveal an autonomous territory. Again, I'm able to bid some amount on it. I think I bid enough that I would be protected against an aggression from Piata. But Piata is, unsurprisingly, able to win this too, with 2 more bonus cards. I build one station in the Red Cross that still leaves me with enough food to increase my population. And I do also have enough science to both play the democracy, the theocracy. I say goodbye with a salute. Served me very well, but it's time to get civil actions going. Even more culture protection going with the democracy. And I can play the team sports for only 1 science thanks to Gotti, and then build 1. I could have built an opera instead. With a copy of reserves, but I thought that this arena was something I was gonna want eventually anyway, especially with my selective mechanized agriculture enabling me to get further into my yellow bank. And I wasn't sure if I would even necessarily want a second opera, because there is Marlena on the road, but I'm not gonna take her. I'm still kind of suffering a little bit in terms of rock production, especially if I want a wonder. And so I was sort of eyeing at this point Fleming over Marlena, because Fleming is going to just provide me with an easy 4 culture production, whereas Marlena I would kind of have to struggle to get more than 1 or 2. This then leaves me with 3 civil actions left, and I decided to take the United Nations. Normally one of the worse Age 3 wonders, but in my situation, it's particularly good. Obviously, it pairs well with Gotti, because Gotti enables you to get every type of urban building going much easier. So the United Nations would give me 20 culture by itself. But in addition, I have this impact of culture in my hand. Definitely a very strong impact. However, with Piata having more rock production than me, I was a little concerned that Piata might actually overtake me in culture production by the time the impact of culture might get revealed if I seeded it. Especially with me having to spend rocks on the United Nations, whereas Piata just has to spend food on the Red Cross. And so, for that reason, seeding the impact of culture felt very risky to me, because if Piata is able to overtake me in culture, then it becomes quite a bad one to seed. However, with the United Nations, I am able to reveal the impact of culture on my turn, a half turn before Piata is able to get more culture production going, making it significantly safer to get this extra 10 culture from the impact. So looking at it that way, the United Nations might actually represent 30 culture for me, which is definitely extremely quite good. So that's why I decided to go ahead and take it here. It's also just guaranteeing me a wonder. Empire State Building was going to be difficult to get good. Space Flight would be good for me, for sure. I have good science production, but I also don't know. Space Flight might not show up until the very end of the game. I might not have the civil actions to take and finish it. So United Nations is available right now for only 3 civil actions. Obviously, it only takes 2 to finish, so it just seemed good to me, worth it. It doesn't really replace any other substantial cards that I would have wanted instead. Maybe the military theory, but again, Piata has pretty much sacrificed almost all their military to go into culture production instead, so a war from Piata was looking extremely unlikely at this point. Oh, I actually just reminded myself of something. Sorry, I didn't mention it at the time. If you recall... Oh, actually, wait. It hasn't happened yet. Oh, it did happen, yeah. When Piata won the autonomous territory. So when Piata, which was here, you'll notice that Piata took culture with it. This was actually a misclick, Piata told me in chat, unfortunately. Oh, this actually happened this turn. I will say, speaking personally, I do think that the autonomous territory selection is one of the worst parts of the Through the Ages UI, because the options, especially on mobile, are really close together. And when you win the autonomous territory, when it's not your turn, like Piata did, whatever you select from it, you can't change, right? There's no back button when it's not your turn. So that makes misclicking really punished Well, it's the autonomous territory. So I do think that it would be helpful if the game could just make the autonomous territory options further spread out to reduce the risk of this happening. That's definitely an unfortunate turn of events for Piata. Anyway, I discard the war and the useless impact. I draw an impact of architecture, an armed intervention, and a modern army. Piata Siege reveals my national pride. More culture for me. Piata decides to take Steve Jobs over Marlena. A little bit of an interesting decision, but it is true that Marlena's tactic power looks like it will accomplish precisely nothing for Piata. And while she will produce 3 culture per turn, Steve Jobs will produce 4 culture per turn, looks like. Especially with getting more science production out of the multimedia. And the happy face might also help Piata. It means that Piata won't have to build any more happy face buildings the rest of the game. He's also available for 1 civil action cheaper than Marlena, meaning that Piata is able to take all of these cards too, all of which are definitely useful for them. So I think that Steve Jobs is probably the right leader for Piata in this situation. However, another downside of taking Steve Jobs is it means Piata is not taking Fleming. And since Piata can't take Fleming now, I am pretty safe in just aiming for him. Anyway, the age is almost certainly going to end after my next turn. So I decided to go ahead and play this copy of strategy while I can before it gets discarded. And then basically my goal this turn, because I am still so significantly ahead of Piata in culture, I decided that I should just go ahead and try to end the game as soon as possible. And the way to do that is just to take as many cards from the card row as possible. And so my goal this turn is basically to get out of corruption, take as many cards from the card row as possible, and prepare to finish United Nations next turn. So to do that, I can take the multimedia, play reserves for rocks, build 1 stage of the United Nations, and then also take all of these cards. Now, a weakness of this play is that I am not going to be able to work on a stage of the Red Cross this turn. Which definitely is not ideal. But I think... Let's see. I'm not going to rewind, but I think maybe if I build a stage of the Red Cross, then I would still be in corruption. Yeah, definitely, right? Because because these are my blue tokens on farms. So, yeah. Because of that, because I want to take as many cards as possible while getting out of corruption, I didn't have quite the leeway to work on a stage of the Red Cross. In retrospect, though, maybe I should have done that because building 1 stage of the Red Cross is obviously a 12-point swing because you're getting 6 culture and you're denying 6 culture. In retrospect, I think I should have not done one of these other things and just build a stage of the Red Cross this turn. Maybe, honestly, I could have just not played the strategy. I really didn't need it. And I think there's not really a particular reason to play the strategy, honestly. I mean, obviously it helps with some impacts, but building a stage of the Red Cross would definitely give me more culture, I think, than the strategy. So I think that was a mistake. Anyway, I draw 2 aggressions and a bonus card. Unlucky draw. Piata takes engineering, so the age is indeed going to end after Piata's turn. And then Piata just takes in urban growth to help Piata get as many urban buildings going as possible. Age 4 begins. I lose Gotti, but that's okay. Looks like Piata probably deliberately left Fleming on 2 civil actions for me, but that's also fine. I have a lot of civil actions this turn. After working on a stage of the Red Cross this turn, my efficient upgrade lets me upgrade 1 of my libraries, and which will give me a bonus 2 culture, thanks to Fleming. And then I can still finish the United Nations. I am 1 culture production ahead of Piata, thanks to Fleming, which lets me reveal the impact of culture for an additional 10 culture, giving me 30 culture from the United Nations. And then with my last civil action, all I can really do is use urban growth to build a 2nd temple to get a little bit of extra culture. 1 extra culture to be specific. Piata's turn. Piata seeds, reveals an impact of variety. This was seeded by me. It's a good one for me. Piata then finishes the red cross for 24 more culture. Then Bill plays his pro sports and a military theory using Steve Jobs both times in the endowment for 6 extra culture, and then just builds another library for as much extra culture as possible. So right before the final impacts are revealed, we can see that at the end, we can see, first of all, Piata did indeed end up getting more culture production than me by the end of the game by just 1 point. So me seeing the impact of culture would have turned out badly for me. United Nations coming in clutch there. As for the culture ratings themselves, Piata did a good job of catching up to me as much as possible, but I have such a head start that I am still 37 culture ahead of Piata going into the final impacts. It's a little hard to imagine a set of impacts that might allow Piata to overcome me, but maybe it's possible. Let's find out. First is Impact of Industry. This gives Piata 3 more points against me, but they're still significantly behind. Next is Impact of Population, which is a neutral impact. Sadly for Piata. Next is Impact of Progress. This is a good impact for Piata, obviously, with the extra science production, but only by 8 points. So Piata will need a really big last impact to win. And it is not Impact of Technology, which is another positive impact for Piata, but only by 4 points, not enough. And I end up winning this game by 22 points. Overall, I'd say this was a pretty straightforward 2-player game where I was able to, more so than Piata, get culture production in Age 1, and then in Age 2, I was able to transition into Gotti to give me, again, maybe not as much as Bach or Shakespeare or even Darwin, but still some extra culture, obviously. And so all that extra culture I had built up from my wonders, from my theocracy, from the religion I had all game that Piata didn't, and then Gotti, obviously. All of that gave me enough of a culture cushion, such that even though Piata was able to do a really good job in Age 3, catching up to me totally peacefully, Piata ended the game with 3 multimedias and 3 operas, got a number of Steve Jobs uses, got the Red Cross. A lot definitely, Piata was able to get a lot done in Age 3, but they just started from a position that was too far behind, and it ended up not being enough in the end. I will say, I did definitely luck out that Piata never drew any useful tactics for them, apparently. Without any tactics, it's just really hard to get significant military pressure going, especially when I have the Himeji Castle like I did in this game. So with the combination of me having Himeji Castle and Piata not having any tactics, there just was never any realistic hope of Piata getting aggressions or wars against me. And when you don't, and even though aggressions and wars in themselves aren't enough to catch up in a 2-player game, they are a very important way you can potentially catch up to a culture leader alongside, building urban buildings and stuff like that. So with that option essentially being close to Piata, especially since Piata ended up with Republic over Kanman, I was just able to ride my early culture advantage to victory. Overall, definitely happy how I played this game. I think it was not a perfect game, but definitely a good game. Beating such a strong player as Piata, definitely a good feeling. Before ending the video, though, let's take a quick look at the standings. So with that victory over Piata, I am now even further ahead in the group, obviously. I'm now 5 points ahead of Piata, with Piata only having 2 games left to play to make up that deficit, and I am 7 points ahead of Delone Carter. The Delone Carter has 1 less game played than I do, so Delone Carter still has some room, but Delone Carter will have to do more than just win 1 game to catch up with me. Now, it is obviously not for certain that I will win the group yet, but it is getting harder for my opponents. So Piata, for example, if Piata wins both of their remaining games, they will have 20 points. So that they could still finish ahead of me, but it would take a particular set of circumstances. Not only would they have to win both those games, but I would have to, at most, get 2nd place in one of my 3-player games and then get last in all the others. Certainly possible, but it would be a specific set of circumstances. Delone Carter has, I think, slightly, larger flexibility because they have much fewer games played than Piata, but it would still be pretty hard for Delone Carter. So with this victory, I was definitely feeling a lot more confident that I could finish first in this difficult group. However, it's certainly not over yet. There's half the games left to play for me, and like I said, Piata and Delone Carter in particular could absolutely still finish ahead of me if things broke right. I think Pepicos too. If Pepicos won all their remaining games, they would have 5, 9, 13. They would be at 19 points. So it's still, I think, possible for Pepicos to finish in first too, but harder than Piata, obviously, but still possible. So it's still kind of anyone's group, even if I have the advantage right now. But until I cover my next game in this group, as always, if you have any comments on my play or my video making, I am constantly looking to improve in both areas. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next one.